I know Stuart hates this one, but Phil and I were commenting earlier that I actually really like this. You can move it. You don't have to unscrew things. So we're not yet adulting well still, which means I don't have a printer at home, so I'm having to work for a wee screen today. So we've been working our way through Luke. We're still in Luke. We're in Luke chapter 2 today. But before we get there, I want to just ask a question. And I'm not looking for anybody to answer. I'm more looking for facial expressions of recognition. Okay? We all on board? I wonder if, for those of us who are parents, or maybe not, maybe you were babysitting one day and this happened to you. Have you ever lost one of your kids? I'm still trying. Not good enough. So it's horrendous. Like I've known really precarious circumstances. I've known life-threatening circumstances. And I've never known fear like losing one of my kids. So a number of years ago, Amanda and I were on holiday at Centre Parks. And I know what some of you are now thinking, Davy, you've changed your holiday at Centre Parks. You very much are now middle class. I've got the dog to prove it. I even play golf, much to Stuart's disgust. So we were at holiday in Centre Parks, and Alfie had just learned to go a bike, and without stabilisers, so he was super gallus. Like he was like racing away ahead of us all week. So one evening I thought, I'll get Amanda a bit of a break, I'll take the boys out a walk. Jack was only a wee tiny thing on stabilisers, right? So he's only just learning to operate pedals, and Alfie's away ahead like Evel Knievel. And I'm shouting at Alfie, you need to wait. So he's waiting, he's letting me and his brother catch up. But then I get so preoccupied with showing Jack how to go these pedals, right, and holding his seat and making sure that he doesn't fall off the bike and stuff, that I completely lost track of where Alfie was. Until suddenly you lift your head up and you go, actually, where is he? And I don't know if any of you have been to Centre Parks, but it's essentially a forest with loads of log cabins, and there's roads that split off everywhere. It wasn't our first time there, we'd been a couple of times. So I thought, he probably knows, we were right heading into his granny's cabin, so I thought he probably knows where he's going, he'll have gotten there already. So Jack and I, we make our way around. We get in Matty and Janice's cabin, that's Amanda's mum and dad. And his bike's not outside. And I've thought, right, I'm not yet panicking. And I go into the house and Alfie's not there. And just that moment of, oh my word, like I've lost him in the middle of a forest. And logic and reason just goes right out the window. Like I'm not actually thinking, I'm in the safest place on earth right now. I'm at Centre Parks. There's staff everywhere, there's security everywhere, there's responsible parents everywhere. I'm just thinking monsters. I'm thinking wild animals, wolves. That's immediately where my mind went. So I leave Jack with his granny, and me and Matty go out looking. Matty goes one way and I go the other way. And I'm literally panicking. I'm screaming his name as loud as I can in this forest and hearing nothing in reply. And I'm running past other mums and dads who are returning for their evening meal. And I'm like, you've not seen a wee boy on a bike? And they're looking at me like, mate, I've just seen 300 kids on bikes. Do you know what I mean? So I'm like, I daren't phone Amanda, right? But then the thought enters my head, I wonder if he's made his way around the whole place and he's gone back to our cabin. So I make my way back to the cabin. At that point, I have to tell Amanda, I've lost our son. She is raging. By the way, there's two versions of this story. There's Amanda's version and there's the truth, which I'm telling you now. And she was raging, understandably, because I had two things: look after the kids and get there safely. And I'd failed on both. So we're now phoning the security place, and they're dead reassuring. They're saying, look, this happens at least 10 times a day. we'll have him back in your hands in no time. But again, logic and reason at this point isn't kicking in. You're just operating from a place of pure fear. So, cut a long story short, after much searching, Amanda and I are now making our way back to our cabin, and there's Alfie's bike sitting outside the cabin. Amanda runs round the back. Now, every morning at Centre Parks, I break all the rules. See, I'm not that middle class. I take all of our leftover breakfast and I throw it out the back in the hope of trying to attract some wildlife, like deers and rabbits and squirrels and ducks and stuff, and the kids watch them off of the window. It's beautiful. You're not meant to, but there it goes. And there's Alfie sitting round the back, totally at peace with the world, like playing with the veg and throwing it into the bushes and trying to attract all the wee squirrels, completely oblivious to the chaos that's happening all around him. Now, why am I telling you that story? Because it kind of ties in with what we're going to look at today. So in Luke chapter 2, if you want to just open your Bibles, we're reading from verse 41. So in the various movements of a journey that Mary and Joseph will have done many, many times, they managed to leave Jesus behind, albeit not at Centre Parks, but in Jerusalem during the Passover. What they find, however, when they locate him, is a powerful reminder to us all about purpose and about priorities. So I'll read it aloud, but if you want to follow on with me, that's brilliant. Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of Passover. When he was 12 years old, he went up to the feast according to the custom. After the feast was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they travelled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And as Jesus grew up, he increased in wisdom and in favor with God and with people. So in our passage here, Mary and Joseph assume that Jesus is with them and returning home from Passover. Now, it's all too easy for us here with modern eyes to look at this passage and to be critical of Mary and Joseph and even consider them somewhat neglectful. But there's a couple of wee hints in the passage that we should consider. It's likely that this was Jesus' first time attending Passover. We can't say for certain if that's the case. But what we can say for certain is that he would have been there, and whilst there, he would have been preparing for his bar mitzvah. This would take place once a young person turned 13, and was significant in that Jewish boys and girls would now be thought responsible for their own actions, and able to decide for themselves how they exercised their faith. At this stage in a young person's life, it was the custom that when the festival ended, the women would travel on with the younger kids, and the men would follow on just after. Now, it was also part of the custom that for kids the age of Jesus was at, they could travel with both parties. They could travel either with the mums and the younger siblings, or they could travel laterally with the dads. So it's easy in and amongst the chaos of pulling together all the team, packing up the 7-seater, doing all the things that we've got today as mums and dads. It's easy then to understand how it's possible that he was left behind. While it's not hugely important to our message today, I thought it's important to point out. Both Mary and Joseph assumed that the boy was with the other. Their priority, and indeed their purpose, was to get home safe. Here's where this might go terribly wrong. We good here, Tim? Look at that. The challenge of priorities. It's easy for us to become preoccupied with our own plans and our own purposes. So when I was kind of preparing, I was thinking about other times, or has there been a specific time where I've got preoccupied with my own plan and my own purpose? And I phoned Amanda from upstairs saying, can you remember a time when I've got preoccupied with my own stuff? And she gave me many examples. I'm only going to share one. So when Alfie was born, I worked at the Haven, and I worked also at Youth for Christ. And whilst I was single and then newly married without a kid, I earned enough money that it made it feasible to live reasonably well. But you add a kid into the mix, and suddenly our household's running at a deficit. And Amanda's mum and dad, bless them, were super kind, and they would throw me a bone every month of like a shift here or a shift there. They would buy us shopping. But as time went on, it no longer was feasible. And I suppose this growing thing in me of, I want to be able to provide for my family, myself. I don't want to rely on Matty and Janice to bail us out every month. So I began looking for work. And a friend of mine's at the time, him and his dad, had a franchise of Wiltshire Farm Foods, delivering frozen meals to elderly folks. And they gave me a job, and that job ensured that we had enough money in to run the home and to look after wee Alfie. Jack wasn't on the scene yet, neither was Joy. And I felt really thankful to Tim and to his dad David that they'd given me this opportunity. And I felt an element of obligation to them both to maintain the employment. I was miserable in it though. And I'm sure we've all had this, where we're in a job and you're just grinding it out every day, and then it gets to the end of the week and you're like, oh. But then the doom in your mind is, I've got to go back in there on Monday. And that's kind of where I was at. But I had got so caught up in my own preoccupation and my own purpose, which was put bread on the table, provide for your family, do the right thing by Tim and by David. Fast forward a year, I am genuinely convinced that I was clinically depressed. But you do the whole West Coast of Scotland Mail thing, which is, I'm not going to see a doctor because I don't want to waste their time. And Amanda got a phone call one day from a friend of hers at the City Mission saying, look, we're looking for a men's project worker, and we think your David would be ideal. So Amanda's like, oh, by the way, there's a job at a mission going. But again, remember, I feel a real obligation to Timmy and his dad David for giving me this job. So, and on top of that, I was quite angry at God at where our family were at that point. My confidence was all shot to bits, so I ultimately didn't go for the job. Fast forward 6 months, the City Mission have interviewed a whole host of people and not been successful in getting someone. The same person contacted Amanda saying, look, we feel really, really strongly that David should put an application in. I'm going to say this now because I no longer work there. I didn't even fill out the application for him. Amanda did, and my brother-in-law. And I went, and short of the interview for here, I don't know that I've ever had an interview go as well. There's laughing and joking in it, and I'm like, this is a doddle. Now, why am I telling you that story? I'm telling you that story to illustrate how bogged down I was with my own sense of purpose. And I was so preoccupied with the providing for my family that I had almost failed to miss God screaming at me, Davy, I've got something over here that I want you to be doing. And I wonder if, for each of us, there are examples of that in our own life, where we've assumed that Jesus is with us, because I had assumed that Jesus was with me at Wiltshire. And he was, in a sense. But it wasn't his best for me. Does that make sense? It wasn't all that he had for me. And I wonder if each of us sitting here are possibly in a similar season, or maybe even had one in the past. And if you're sitting in that place today, maybe now is a good time to pause and to reflect on our own priorities and our own purposes and see if they align with actually what God's saying to us at this point in time. The purpose of Jesus. So it's revealed to us here in verse 49. So his mum and dad find him in the temple, like Amanda and me. They're raging. They're trying to hide their rage, to affirm the boy in front of everybody. They're like, do you realise the trouble you've caused us? Do you realise the pain and the agony that you've put us through? And Jesus' reply, why were you searching for me? He asked. Don't you know I had to be in my Father's house? The ESV Bible says, I must be, which I think is better. I must be in my Father's house. The I must here of Jesus reveals his clear understanding of his purpose and his mission. It's interesting to me, at least, that the first words here quoted in the Gospel of Luke are revealing his divine sonship and his life's mission. That is to be about his Father's business. For the 12-year-old Jesus, this was perfectly natural and even obvious to him. Like he couldn't fathom why his mum and dad were worried. You see, God calls each of us to live intentionally and with purpose, all the while rooted in our identity as children. My coming here to ACC, I know confused a lot of people. I had people come to me after I kind of announced that I was leaving the mission and coming here. None of whom publicly, but lots in private, saying, what are you doing? Like, you're really good at what you do. Like, you've built up a great reputation in this place. You've built up a great network of contacts in the field, and you are in God's purpose. You're doing the thing that God's built you to do. But here's the thing. I had that I must niggling away at me for a long, long time. The I must crept in, and I'm now here following what I believe is God's purpose for my life. And I'm going to be honest with you, it's terrifying. Like, it's really scary. I've said to Stuart a few times in the office, I have less than no clue what I'm doing. Like, and it's nice to laugh at that, but it's also like we've to recognise it as well. Like at times when God places that I must moment in our lives and you decide to step out into it, there's that bit where you go, I have no clue if this is going to work. But I know that God's in it. Both Amanda and I are convinced that God's in it. It's been beautiful for us to have you guys as a church affirm us in that. It makes all the difference. And again, I wonder if in your own life, are you aware of the I musts? Is that a thing that we live out of, where we're hearing God enough on our own plans and our own purposes and our own priorities? Because it's so easy to get sidetracked. It's so easy just to get into the mundane of today, and you just keep grinding it out and grinding it out and grinding it out, and we never really stop to assess, actually, what am I doing here? Is this actually what God's asking? Growing in obedience and in wisdom. So after the account in the temple, we read that Jesus submits to his parents and continues to grow in wisdom. I'm going to remind my kids of that. He grows in wisdom, stature, and favour with God and people. I find it incredible that the Son of God valued growth and obedience. Like, in preparing for this, I almost went down a road with that. And then thankfully Stuart pinged me a wee email and it caused me to just pause and think, actually, what's being communicated in this passage? At 12 years old, the Son of God valued growth and obedience. These words, growth and obedience, are quite archaic, and we can shy away from it at times because they call us to action. And if you're anything like me, what you really want is comfort and to be left alone. Yeah? Growth and obedience are bad words in our house. That laughter, I'm taking that as I see you, Davy. Growing in faith hasn't been instantaneous for me. For any of us, it's required effort and a commitment to align myself with God. It's cost me, and it will cost us. I've said this before. If I don't spend the time necessary getting to know Amanda, and I don't spend the time necessary getting to know what her purpose and her will is, and what she preoccupies her mind with, and she doesn't do the same in return, our marriage won't succeed. Yeah? Well, I don't think it's any different in our relationship with God. I think we have to spend the time getting to know Him, getting to know His will and His purpose for our lives. Because if we don't, we will all too quickly get dragged into that land of preoccupation with our own self and our own needs and our own desires. And we might go 10, 15, 20, 25 years before we finally wake up to the reality that I was built for a purpose that wasn't working at Wiltshire Farm Foods. Yeah? Davy Black is one of my heroes in the faith. He was here at my induction. I've met loads of folk in my life as a Christian who are hugely inspirational. Davy's one of a handful that stand out for me. He's a hugely successful character in his own right. Davy's family were farmers, Christians, and when his dad passed, he took the family farm and he gave it to Davy, the older of the three sons. And under Davy's stewardship, the farm grew and it was more successful, and it allowed them to purchase other farms. I think eventually they owned 4 farms, 4 working farms, 3 of which were down near the airport at Glasgow, and the other 2, 1, 2 was up in Kilmacombe. Him and his brothers ran them very, very successfully. They knew their purpose, they knew their will. And as Davy matured in his life and he'd raised his family, he had established a plan in his head, and the plan was, I'm going to go travelling. When I retire, I'm going to retire early, and I'm going to take some of the wealth that I've amassed in my life, and me and Jean are going to see the world. And we're going to do all the things that we couldn't do during my working life, because I was up at 4 a.m. looking after cattle and all the rest of it, and working 14, 16, 18-hour days at points. But the I must came in. Davy's younger brother, Donnie, another hugely inspirational character. I call him the patron saint of drug addicts. Donnie is a beautiful soul. He's somebody that genuinely concentrates on what's God saying to me in my life. And Donnie had befriended a cousin of the family who had just come out of prison. And the guy who was just out of prison had this passion and this desire to create a piece of work reaching out to drug addicts and those struggling in poverty. So they approached Davy to say, see that farmhouse that's lying there, can we have that to start a drug rehab? And no was the loud reply. They said, Davy says to him, look, I've just had a guy sign a 10-year lease on that place. So it's not even an option. So Donnie, the younger brother, and his friend who was just out of prison, established a prayer meeting. So they prayed every week that they would get access to that farmhouse. And within a month of beginning to pray, the person who had signed the lease approached Big Davy to say, look, I've been gifted an opportunity to go to Australia in an all-included job. They're going to pay for my house, my flight's over. Please, is there any way that I can get out of that lease? I must. So Davy, a bit perplexed by this, goes back to his study, big Christian guy, and he starts to meditate on this. He's like, God, what are you saying right now? And for a big brethren man, and this is his words, not mine, I heard God speak. And God says to him, to whom much is given, much is required. And it meant that Davy had to take his plans and his purposes, and he had to put them to one side, because he knew at that point actually what God was calling him to was not to travel the world with him and Jean, but actually to establish this piece of work. And similar to myself in the current predicament I'm in, they had no clue, less than no clue, what they were doing. They had grown up as farmers looking after sheep and cows and grain. They knew nothing about addiction. They knew nothing about poverty, about pain and suffering and homelessness. But they started this piece of work. Fast forward 35 years, I think it's one of, if not the most successful programs in the UK. It's radically changed thousands of men's lives, myself being one of them. And I know, because I've asked him, does he regret it? Does he regret giving those twilight years of his life, those years when he should have been travelling and seeing the world? And I've seen him with tears in his eyes, which is odd, because he's not much shorter than you, Andy. And he's like a colossus of a man. He's older now and he's shrinking. But to see a man of that stature, and a man who I have huge respect for, cry, like actually cry, at the prospect of all that God has done through him in reaching lives like mine's. And he told us a story one day about the Wiseman brothers. You know Wiseman, Derrys? He came up to chapel one day furious because they had a monopoly on the milk and they were squeezing farmers. And he said, I'm going to send them some tracts and a letter for the Haven. And I'm going to tell them that every morning I come up and I tell 10 drug addicts that Jesus loves them. And I watch their lives being radically transformed. And I'm going to ask these brothers, are they happy with the millions that they've amassed? Are they happy squeezing us farmers for every penny they can get? And the hope that something of my life and what God's done with my life impacts them and causes them to change their purpose and their priorities and maybe think about doing something good. Now, that's all dead romantic, but it takes graft. I know for Davy and Jean, it cost them everything. Davy and Jean's house was like Sauchiehall Street. It was constantly full of people, some of whom had good motives, a lot of whom had terrible motives. They buy tea bags by the sack, and they don't buy jars of coffee, they buy tubs of coffee. And they don't buy packets of biscuits, they buy boxes of biscuits. That's the amount of traffic that comes through their house. But what's allowed them to sustain it all these years has been the I must. It's been the, no, I know I heard God. And that's what allowed me to place to one side my own agendas. Jesus' model here perfectly demonstrates what it means to prioritize God's purpose. And in doing so, he presents us with a challenge. The challenge is for us to evaluate our own priorities. His own growing in wisdom and obedience reminds us that growing spiritually is a lifelong process. And as we've already noted, there really isn't a quick fix. My own journey from chaos to where I'm at today has not been easy. And I'm sure that each of you, again, have your own stories of trials that you have come through. But that's the consistent journey, I think, of the Christian faith. It's for each time we overcome a thing, we go back to God and say, right, what's next? What's the next part of the journey? What's the next part of you that you want to reveal to me? And like Jesus, we're all called, I don't care who you are, to prioritise God's purpose in our lives. Even in the ordinary and the mundane things of our daily existence, we are called to grow daily in wisdom and in obedience. Show of hands if you need wisdom. Show of hands if you need to be obedient. Good, we're all on the same page. I'm going to finish there, and I'm going to ask Stuart up to lead us in communion.